Aguin Erev Shabbos. This is Gemara Nazir Daf Nun Gimel. Apologies for the lateness of today's shir. Fridays. That's all I have to say. Fridays. But Baruch Hashem, Shabbos is Daf. Hopefully, should be able to be getting up before Shabbos due to the longer Friday. Baruch Hashem. So we pick it up in the bottom of Nun Beis. Amid Beis. We're 10 lines in the bottom. First word on line is Chada Minhoin. We begin Ba'i Rami Bar Chama, continuing the discussion that we've been having for the last few dafin, which is very Tumah oriented, most particularly Tumah with regard to a Nazir. That if a Nazir becomes Tameh, what happens? There's a din of Tiglachas. There's a din that the Nazir has to shave his head and restart his Nazir. The question is all the different forms of Tumah that the Nazir could potentially come in contact to. So one of them was a Chatzi Kav of Atzama. He used to have a Kav of bones, and we're going to get to other issues. And yesterday we particularly left off with the Shidra Vilgilgalais, the spine and the skull, how they impart Tumah. And that's really where we're going to pick it up with today. Whether there's a minimum quantity for the spine and the skull, or is it the same minimum quantity of the Chatzi Kav Atzama as the rest of the body? Or do the spine and the spine and the skull have their own rules? So, Ba'i Rami Bar Chama. After a lengthy introduction, we dive right in. Roiva Hatzamais min Shidra Vigilgalais. If I have a roiva, a quarter kav of bones from the Shidra, the spine, the gulls, and the skull, mai. What's the din? Ki katani Chatzi Kav Atzamais. When do we learn it's a din and a half a kav? That's the rest of the body. Aval min shidra v'gulgal is the chamiri, as we know that the spine and the skull are more chamer. Afilu roiva atzamais would impart tumah. Oidoma lo ishna. So asks Rami Bar Chama, fundamental shaila, is the skull and the spine the same level, or no? Or is it more lenient? Amar Rava Toshema, says Rava will bring a raya. Says the Braisa, says the Mishnah, Hashidra Gulgalais. The Mishnah says that if the Nazir comes in contact with the Shidra and the Gulgalais, then he becomes Tameh. If you're going to tell me that it's going to be a case of even a roiva, a quarter kav of bones, does even a Shidra of the Gulgalais that came from the spine and the skull, Chamir, then it comes out that it's a more chamer, meaning that it's already going to be metameh, a roiva kav, not a chatzi kav, not a half a kav like usual, even at the quarter kav, it's going to be metameh because it's from the spine or the skull. So asked Rava proves, I should say, listni al roiva asamus abam min shidra. So the Mishnah shouldn't say from the spine or the skull, it should say a roiva asamus from the spine or the skull. From the fact that the Mishnah didn't say that, says Rava, is a raya that what quantity of spine or skull gives off tumah. Says Rava, seemingly it is not a roiva, but rather it's going to have to be a full chatzi kav like the rest of the body. As we turn over to today's daf, the Gimel and Aleph, the Gemara says no raya. What are you talking about? Rava is the memra, is the one that says Loi nitzurcha ela l'shidra v'gilgala shein bahem roiva atzamais. Rava is the one that says that the reason we had to teach the case of shidra v'gilgalais is that when they do not contain a roiva atzamais, meaning even less. We thought before, in the proof, we thought that really the spine and the skull could even be more. And now it's going to be metame by a quarter. Says Rava, no, even less than a roiva. That's the chiddush of the spine and the skull. That even less than a roiva is going to be metame. So says the Gemara, Rava, you himself, what proof are you bringing? You're bringing a proof? No, you hold it's metame even less. Answers the Gemara, Basa Deshama. May Rabbi Akiva. Rava said it's less than a quarter after he heard from Rabbi Akiva. So in some element he was chayzer, he reinterpreted the Mishnah. So now says the Gemara, so Rava doesn't have a raya. So we're back to square one. What is the status of the spine and the skull? Shammai Omer says Shammai one bone from the spine and the skull is going to give off Tumah. So that's Shammai. The Chachamim argue on Shammai. So seemingly, what would the Chachamim say? We think that the Chachamim would say that how far, anytime we have a machlokes, we don't want to make it too far. So the Chacham are going to say it's true. Not one bone, but seemingly they'd give in once it's a raiva, once it's a quarter. Says the Gemara, no, not necessarily. Shammai de machmir tfei. Shammai is very machmir. So Shammai says one bone. Maybe the Chacham do go to the opposite extreme and say chatzi kav, and not necessarily a raiva kav, so we have no raya. Says the Gemara, 1 second. So let's prove that detail itself. So why don't we prove from here? Time of the Shammai de machmir. Meaning the answer is the proof. The answer should show that when will it be mitame? Only at a full chatzi kav. Because Shammai so chamer, the Chachamim argue. Says the Gemara that it's not a raya. Because Dilma'ad can lo bli Rabban alei de Shammai, 7 lines down, until now the Rabbanan don't argue in Shammai, elo be'etzem echod. Maybe they only argue on that case. Maybe the Rabbanan would be moida. And basically it's a classical dichoy. We don't have a clear raya from the Mishnah either way. And therefore says the Gemara, once you don't have a clear raya either way, it can be learned to both ways. And therefore we don't have a raya. What is the status of the spine or the skull, whether it's going to give off Tumah even at a Roiva Hakav. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Now we move on to other forms of Tumah, and we're going to see there was a progression in Klal Yisrael, in Shitais, with regard to the status of Tumah, with regard to Dam, and Atzamais, like we just spoke about. Zikanim Arishanim, original Zikanim said Miksasanayim, part of the Zikanim would say, Chati Gavat Tzamais, Chati Lug Dam, Lakol. All entities are metame, half a kava atzamais of bones, and half a lug of dam. Whereas roiva atzamais revius dam, loy, they would not, loy lakol, would never give off tama. So opinion number 1 was, all tama is one rule. Chetzi v'chetzi, half a kav atzama is half of dam, and not a reiv atzama is a quarter of atzama is and a quarter of blood. That was shita number 1. That was part of the Zikanim Arishainim. Miksasa and part of those Zikanim Ayoyim, they would say no. Af reiv atzama is, even a quarter kav of bones, revius dam nakol, would always give off tama. So the opposite extreme. Bezdin Shalachrayim, those were the Zikanim Arishainim. A latter Bezdin come along, then they say Amru, they said, Chatzi Gavatzama is Chatzi Dam Lakol. It's all a din of Chatzi. Roi Vatzama is Revius Dam Litrumo Likachim. So now we start splitting hairs. It's not all or none. It's not a half a kav of tzamais and a half a kav of lug of dam for everything, and anything less than that is not metame. No, half a kav and a half a lug for sure gives off tama. But when it comes to trumar and kachim, then even a roiva, a quarter of bones and a quarter of dam, will be metame. Aval, however, Loyla Nazir Vaisa Pesach. Nazir Vaisa Pesach is different, and they will not be mitame with only a quarter. So says the Gemara, Michdi. Let's see. Ein achras hashlishi machras. This final achra, this bezin shel achreim, is not machria. So the question is, why did Rebbe, when Rebbe taught the Mishnah, why did Rebbe seemingly go with this last opinion of the bezin shel achreim? So Amar Rav Yaakov Aridim Imnei Shemua Amru, Rebbe heard it from a Shemua. Mipi Chagai Zachariah Malachi. Absolutely fascinating that this is Zikanim Arishainim wasn't just a random opinion. Rebbe heard that it was from Chagai Zachariah Malachi, and that's why Rebbe incorporated that into our Mishnayos. Says the Gemara, 4 lines from the bottom, continuing all the different cases of Tumah in the Mishnah. Al Elu Anazir Migalech, and these Nazir Migalech. Says the Gemara, Al Elu Dereisha, Lamuti Asik Kaseira. The whole list in the Mishnah comes to preclude or exclude, I should say, a bone the size of a barley. Why? Dal Magoy Val Masoi in. Because when it comes to a piece of bone the size of a barley, if you touch it or you lift it, then it gives off Tumah. But that level of Tumah, that little piece of bone, is not enough to give off Tumah's oil. Val elu de seifa, whereas in the end of the Mishnah, zlamute even aschuches, it's coming to exclude a case of a protruding stone. If we have a wall that the stones are leaning out into Rosh Hashanah, there's going to be some area of tumah underneath. It will not impart tumah. We continue on the last line. V'chatzi kava atzamais. Says the Mishnah, a half a kav of bones. That is what's going to give off tummy. Says the Gemara as we turn over to Nun Gimel Amid Beis. Chatzi kav atzamais in roiva atzamais loy. Says the Gemara that when the Mishnah says a chatzi kav, it's talking about the bone. That's when it gives off tumah. But a roiva kav, a quarter of a kav loy, does not give off tumah. So, what is this case in which the tumah is only given off when you have a half a kav and not by a roiva? Says the Gemara in the second line, if you're going to tell me that the case is that how much bone do you have? You have the bone the size of a barley. That already gives off tumah. So what do you mean? What do you mean when you're teaching a quarter kav of bone does not give off tumah? Why not? It's the size of a barley. Ella says the Gemara, on the third line of Nun Gimel Amid Beis. Ella says the Gemara, says the Gemara, you know what the case is referring to? The case is referring to where the bones are ground into kemach, are ground into flour. So therefore, is there an etzem kisa'ira? Is there a bone the size of a barley? No. Why not? So the bones are ground to flour. And therefore, that's the reason why you need to have a quarter kav of bones. Continues the Gemara. There's supposed to be a 2 dots over here. Apologies that in this text on the screen does not. 4 lines down. If there is flesh enough to regenerate, that's the amount that gives off tumah. Says the Gemara, or asks the Gemara, what is the din if there's not that amount of flesh? So we have a machlekes. Rav Yochanan Amar, if there's not that quantity of flesh on the bone, whereas Rish Lakish Amar, no, Nazir megalech aleim. Then comments the Gemara. Rav Yochanan Amar, Nazir megalech aleim. The Gemara explains why. Dagatani Bereisha says in the Reisha, Lever min ames, v'alever min achai, sheyesh aleim kizayis basarin. So the diuk says Rav Yochanan. The implication in the Mishnah is if it has a chatzi kav if it has aver minacha, if it has one more time, sheesh of ksayis basar, really ksayis of basar, then it's mitame in aval in aleim loy. Whereas Rish Lakish argues, Shimon Lakish Aimer megaleach, says Shimon Lakish that you're going to be megaleach even if it does not have a kazayis of basar. Why? He learns on the seifa. Medaloi katani b'seifa. Meaning, and this is always an issue whenever you have a steer in diuk. And the Reisha says these cases are yes mitame. The seifa says these cases are not mitame. So in the Reisha, Rav Yochanan is medayik that it says that kazayis basar is going to be mitame and the less will not. Rish Lakish says no, because the seifa, when it lists the things which are not mitame, it doesn't say something without a kazayis of basar. So the question is, why doesn't Rav Yochanan hold like Rish Lakish? Why doesn't Rish Lakish hold like Rav Yochanan? As we call it, the classical Gemara game of ping pong. For Rav Yochanan Rav Yochanan responds to Rish Lakish explaining the Seifa, Kolecha de Masha Michlala, Loik Atani B'Seifa. So we get a Shas rule, says Rav Yochanan, that whenever you can be medayik, you can learn something out of the Seifa. There's no reason that the Risha would have to speak out that precise case. Ask Gemara 1 second. So the Mishnah itself lists a case of Chatikav Atzamos that give off Tumah. Demashi Chatikav Atzamos in Reva Atzamos Loi. So what's the implication? Only a half and not a Reva. And yet, Vikotani B'Seifa Reva Atzamos. Seifa says that a Reva Atzamos does not give off Tumah. So if you, Rav Yochanan, are teaching me that whenever we know for the Seifa, we don't have to write in the Reisha. Why, when it comes to the bones, do we ask? Answers the Gemara, Hasam, over there, by the Chatzi Kavat Samois, Ilav Roiva Samois. If it didn't say that a Roiva Samois doesn't give off Toma, Hava Amina, I would have thought, Afilu al Magoi, Val Masoi, Loi. I would have thought that there's no Toma at all. So the Hach, Yitzchak Lemiste, Roiva Samois, Ta'al Elila, Nudein, Anazmi Kaleach. Dafka didn't Oyhel. But therefore, you can't ask on this rule of Rav Yochanan. So Gemara has another kasha. But what about v'chati lug dam? What about a half a lug of dam? Disham ismina. Chati lug of dam in ravis adam loi, which we learn out of chati yes and a ravias. No, and yet even though you can learn it from the reisha, they go down even say ravias adam does not give off tama. Kasha Rav Yochanan's rule. Answers the Gemara, Hasam Nafuke Mid Rabbi Akiva. Over there, it's coming to exclude from the din of Rabbi Akiva, Dam Rabbi Akiva, Ravi is Adam, Haba Mishnei Meisim Itame. Bo'yel or Migalech Olav. That Rabbi Akiva said, even if it comes from two different Meisim, whereas the Tanakhama was arguing, that's why it had to speak it out, even though you learned it out from the Reisha. We're going to stop over here, and we'll pick it up dealing further into the Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish in the next year. B'siyata Dishmaya.